Okay, let's begin with the word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are thankful for this new week, this opportunity to once again open your word, to understand the truths that are written in it, to understand time setting and the limitations that we have to understand the future. But Lord, we know that you prepare us and warn us of these events in advance and help us to understand these things correctly. We pray for Caleb and his family and friends, those that are mourning his loss. We just ask that you can be with them and others who are suffering in various ways. We also, Lord, pray for this movement, the light that has been coming upon our path, and the false light that Satan seeks to hinder true light with. We ask, Lord, that we can have the spirit of discernment in understanding what is truth. I pray for each person. You know, Lord, the struggles that we have. You have felt all these things yourself through thy Son, and you understand our frame. So we pray, Lord, that you can strengthen us and encourage us in this world of sin. Be with us now as we look at this study. Direct it in the way that you choose and help us to follow where you lead. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone. This week we have we're looking at this November 22nd prediction. We're sort of going to finish it off and then look at the connections to what's happening now in regard to time setting. And so I'm not really sure exactly how this is going to go or what conclusions we're going to draw. Now, we know that one of the things that happened as we studied Millerite history, and especially as we were looking at Ellen White's statements in early writings, page 74, there was counsel there regarding time setting. And when we looked into that history, we can see that there was a great deal of fanaticism going on. And we know that as human beings, we all make mistakes. And we need to be willing to see those mistakes. Now, when it comes to the November 22nd, 2018 prediction, the purpose of that prediction at the time, I maybe took it too casually in the way that I addressed it at the time. But my underlying intent was not to make some new prediction. I mean, we already had some pretty powerful predictions. We had July 18. But it was my concern that can we predict events in the future, even if we have a chronology and we have a timeline laid out, we have a structure. Can we then, from that, predict an event? That was really the question. And I didn't understand at the time what was going on behind the scenes. If I had, I would have been a lot more careful in the things that I said to people, which later on were thrown back at me. And I'm going to read some of my emails that went on regarding this prediction as we get on in this study. But I just want to go through this again quite clearly, what we were predicting and when we were predicting it, so that there isn't any misunderstanding regarding this. So I'm going to go to the whiteboard and get rid of this stuff that's up there. So we went through the whole idea of the prediction that it's connected to November 22nd, 977 BC. So we're not going to go through all those connections. But what we are doing is we're connecting this date, November 22nd, 977 BC, which is the 15th day of the 8th month, with this counterfeit feast day. And we connected this to the Thanksgivings and the prayer and fasting dates in Millerite history. And some of that we might go back and look at a bit more detail. Maybe, we'll see. But what we had done is we had connected November 22nd, 2018. Now this date, as far as what it is, originally I had the 13th day of the 8th month, or August 3rd, not August 13th, but the 13th day of the 8th month on the biblical calendar, which would be a symbol of August 13th, or a symbol of Palmani, so the 8th month, 13th day. Though I wasn't really thinking that back then. Now I've come to the conclusion that this is the 12th day of the 8th month on the biblical calendar. Now we didn't predict anything on November 25th, 2018. But this happens to be the 15th day of the 8th month. And after the event, we had looked at that, what had happened there, and connected it with the 15th day of the 8th month. But originally I would have thought that was the 16th day of the 8th month. Now I did show some of the problems in trying to use, what calendar do we use, or how do we determine the date? And this is one of those dates that you have different methods. So there are different methods of determining a biblical date. Most of the time, they all align. That is, you don't have a contradiction. But in this case, we ended up with a contradiction. And that is, we had various dates that we could have used if we had used the different ways that the biblical month or the biblical date was determined in the past. Now, I'm going to clarify why I chose this date. So I'm going to look at that again. So I know some of this is tedious for people, but why I chose that date rather than the 13th day of the 8th month and the 16th day of the 8th month. And I did it in retrospect. That is, I didn't do it at the time. I did it afterwards. So I wasn't understanding what was coming. All I knew is that I had this November 22nd date here, and we could connect it through a structure to this November 22nd date here. And the biblical dates were still things that I couldn't really determine what they meant, if anything. Now, of course, this is significant because it's a period of 3 days, which is a symbol of the prediction before midnight. And this 3 days shows up again and again in the scriptures in connection with predictions. Now, what we did is it would be on November 19th that we're going to make this prediction. That is, we know about November 22nd and we tell people about it. I write a letter to the elders and ask them about it. And I also believe that on November 21st, that we would be doing the weekly prayer meeting, and that Heidi and I were going to present what we had found about November 22nd. But I asked people about it, and there seemed to be this resistance, which I didn't fully understand at the time, because there'd never been a resistance before to anything that we had done in the movement sense. Individuals might have resisted it, but this just seemed kind of odd. And especially since we were very open about what we were doing. There was nothing secretive or and so forth. But I was a little bit casual in my language about it. I'd say, oh, maybe we're going to have this happen or that happen. But I made it quite clear that the issue was, can we make predictions? And we need to study this before the event to see if we can make a prediction. This didn't seem to go over well. People didn't want to do this. They said, well, go make your prediction on Facebook and leave us out of it, basically. Well, if I'd done that, they definitely wouldn't have liked it. Now, what we did end up doing is on the 21st, we had a study at someone's house, and there was about 9 people there. And one of them was Larry Hine. Now, he was there obviously as a spy, so to speak, to see what it was we were teaching, because they were very suspicious of me for no reason that I know of, other than that in the past, things had happened with different people, and they were expecting the sort of same thing or same attitude from me for some reason. So it didn't really make much sense to me, but they were suspicious. So Larry Hine was there, and so when we made this prediction, as we talked about before, we looked at 1 Kings chapter 12 and specifically chapter 13, verse 1 to 5. And this is where Jeroboam's serving at the altar, and his hand is going to be, withered or shriveled or weakened in some way. So maybe he has a stroke or something. He can't use his hand. And then he's going to ask for the prophet to pray for him and restore his hand, which he does. So we have a restraint and a loosening, which we understand is a symbol dealing with Islam. But whether something was going to happen with Islam on November 22nd, that we didn't know. And we also know that there was this prophet was from Judah, Jeroboam's in the north. Maybe it has something to do with the king of the north and the king of the south in our history. Really, we didn't know. So we had this study, and all we could say is that there was this restraint and loosening, and that it probably had to do with Trump, because Jeroboam is typifying Trump. And we had done that by connecting him to the presidents of the United States, and to all this history. And we could also, that we're connecting him to Ahaz and to all this line of the kings of Judah are somehow connected with that as well, though that's Judah. But anyway, we connected these things, and I'm not going to go through all that again. But here we're going to make a prediction. And then what happens, I think it's on, I don't know which day it's on. It might have been Friday, so the next day after Thanksgiving. And we read a newspaper report, or we heard something about it. I can't remember. And I was driving to the school there in the parking lot, and we saw Larry Hine. And I mentioned something about it. It looks like it was fulfilled, so I'm basically talking from, and maybe we were just walking and he was in the truck. That could be it, because we lived right there on the property. But he was in a truck, and we said something about it being fulfilled or whatever. And he said, well, I don't think so. I don't think that makes any sense. So he took it that we took it that it was fulfilled. Now, what we were trying to do is understand what happened. So to us, it wasn't like we really seriously knew that we had understood this event correctly or anything like that. But then also on November 25th, another event occurred. And that was the confrontation at the Mexican border with the agents there. So it wasn't the American military, but it was these agents. And we're going to look at these reports, who fired tear gas and rubber bullets because of what was happening at the border. Now, of course, the media blows things up, especially in connection with Trump. And there was suggestion to people that this wasn't such a big deal. It was just really anti-Trump propaganda in the media. But the point is, definitely something happened November 25th that was newsworthy, and something happened November 22nd that was newsworthy. But they wouldn't have been things that we would have predicted as far as events. But they did seem to symbolize a restraint and a loosening in connection with that history. So that's what we're going to look at, is those news reports. and this should be clear, I think for most people who've been following this, what we're presenting up there is pretty clear. So the news reports that I looked at the time, I'm going to just share my screen, is, okay, that's not the one I want first. This is the one I want first. So this is CNN. Trump politicizes Thanksgiving call with troops to attack migrants and judges and to attack judges or something. So, I mean, CNN overblows things a little bit. I'm going to make this bigger so we can see this. So President Trump struck a nakedly political tone during a Thanksgiving call with U.S. service members stationed around the world as he steered the conversation toward controversial political topics. So, I mean, they're always framing everything in this certain way. It's CNN. It says the president also pressed the commanding officer of a Coast Guard ship in Bahrain on trade before touting his trade policies and arguing that every nation in the world is taking advantage of us. And of course, CNN is going to see this as an outrageous statement. U.S. presidents have traditionally called troops stationed abroad during the holidays to boost morale and remind the country of their service, making Trump's rhetoric yet another striking break from the norms of presidential behavior. After the call wrapped, Trump entertained more than 24 questions from reporters and once again discredited a CIA assessment about the killings of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi, however you say his name. This was sadly predictable and avoidable, said retired Rear Admiral John Kirby, a CNN military and diplomatic analyst. The president's conduct on that call, the manner in which he politicized it, demonstrated an utter and complete disregard for what military service means. Now, of course, what these people believe and the people they choose to quote and all that is always picked for a certain narrative, and we all know that. Trump has not shied away from politicizing the military in the past, and on Thursday, he drew on U.S. men and women in uniform to justify his controversial deployment of nearly 6,000 U.S. troops to the southern border. So this is something that really is, is obviously very controversial. Now, when he did this, the part of the problem is he was going to use troops to protect the southern border. But the topic brought Trump to another familiar airing of grievances as he complained over the phone to the general that the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has become a big thorn in our side. So what they had done, and we mentioned this last time, is they issued a temporary restraining order blocking the Trump administration from barring migrants who cross into the U.S. illegally from seeking asylum. So this is a restraint of actions that Trump would take at the border. Now, this is a temporary restraining order, and it would have gone on. I'm not sure how long it was for, but it definitely covered that period of time that we're looking at here. So Trump is going to complain about this Ninth Circuit Court, whatever it's called. And so we can see that this is part of the issue. Now he's talking about how the troops need to defend our borders and so forth. They're taking this as Trump is asking for actions against the migrants who come across the border. And obviously with the 6,000 troops stationed along the border, then there would be some concern for that. So this is initially what we said to Larry Hine, is that this is a restraint. So I mean, I think that's a valid argument. I mean, is it something that we predicted in this way? No. So it's not like we made a prediction and our prediction came true about any certain event. All that we could see is that a certain part of our understanding was correct. That is, we said that there would be a restraint, and there was a restraint. And that restraint is really noted on this Thanksgiving phone call for the very reason that Trump can't act I mean, if he had the ability to act, he could have acted then, but he didn't. His hand is restrained. So I don't know what people think of this, whether I'm stretching things or not. Does it seem to people a reasonable idea that this restraint that happens here would fulfill the conditions that we talked about? That Trump's hand is restrained, but we didn't know what his hand was restrained about. And so is this restraint here a sufficient application of prophecy? Remember, it's on this counterfeit feast day, Thanksgiving, and it's part of a structure. So the question is that a fair interpretation? So I'd like some thoughts on this.
Well, when you look at it,
Just
Jeroboam, 977 AD or BC,
Yeah,
that prophecy is typifying Donald Trump from 2018. Sort of having this here Ninth Circuit ruling restraining him.
yeah.
It does seem a bit of a leap.
Okay, so it wouldn't be a really solid. I mean, if we were going to make a prediction, we would not make that prediction, right? Like, I mean, that wouldn't have been, if we had made this as a major prediction, and that's all that came of it, that really wouldn't fulfill what our expectations would be. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, Trump being restrained, how common is that? You know, generally, they were looking to restrain him, and pretty much it's an ongoing thing with Donald Trump that the Senate or whatever were looking to restrain him all the time.
Okay.
You know, so how often did that occur? You know, was this? I'm just
Because
thinking.
he could have been restrained.
If it was the only time,
right?
If it was maybe the only time in his presidency that he was restrained or something.
Right.
the first time, isn't this the first time he was restrained?
Well, yes. I would think it is.
Yeah, I thought it was. I don't know.
So
Yes.
It is quite a rare thing.
So what's that?
So is it him being restrained? Is it a rare thing?
Well, it's not a rare thing, but it's the first time he's restrained. And it's a type of military restraint.
Yeah, it seems like that would bring significance to it.
Yeah.
So you were doing this your prediction. You were saying, can we make a prediction?
And I don't think we can. I mean, all we could say is, you know, maybe Trump's going to be restrained, but that doesn't tell us a lot. So we wouldn't have expected that Trump would be restrained on military action at the Mexican border. And that wouldn't fulfill what we were looking for as far as prophecies connected with these events. That is, if we're going to make a prediction of what we would think that would be happen, we would think it would be something a lot bigger than this.
Yes.
Right. So I would say that this would be a pretty minor fulfillment of a prediction connected to 977 BC. But it would be a fulfillment of a restraint. And the first restraint that I know of Trump on military action.
Right.
So the question then is, see, because my view is that we couldn't make a prediction, that we couldn't predict an event, and we didn't. But we could know something about what that line means or what that date means. But I still think that mostly this is about an internal event in this movement, because what else is restrained? Is this prediction itself restrained?
Well, you were restrained from making a presentation.
Right. So what was happening externally was symbolizing what was happening internally. But what was happening externally wasn't a major event, even though it's newsworthy. It wasn't a major event. What was happening internally becomes the bigger issue for me about the November 22nd prediction. Now, when it comes to the next part of it, so as a few days pass, we're going to run into another story. And this story happens to what happens at the border. And so this is obviously connected to what was happening, what Trump is referring to on November 22nd. So this is going to be the border protection. This isn't the American military, in my understanding of this. So it's not like he's restrained and now the American military can go in and do this. But there's an incident at the border as a whole bunch of migrants try to cross the border. So more than 500 men, women, and children overwhelmed Mexican police blockades, prompting U.S. agents to fire tear gas at U.S. Border Patrol as U.S. Border Patrol helicopters flew overhead. So, this was a big news story, but, not something major I would say, from a prophetic, biblical point of view, and definitely not connected with what we would have expected in making a prediction prior to November 22nd. So this happens on November 25th. And Reuters news agency quoted a Mexican Interior Ministry statement saying it would deport 500 migrants who tried to violently and illegally breach the border fence. The statement also said Mexico would not deploy military forces to control the migrants. About 5,000 Central American migrants, many of them attempting to escape poverty and violence in their homelands, have arrived in recent days to Tijuana, just south of the western U.S. state of California, after making their way through Mexico via a caravan. Earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump implored Mexico and Central American countries Sunday to halt the stream of migrants heading to the United States, even as Mexico denied his claim it was willing to allow U.S. asylum seekers to stay there until their cases were decided by American immigration courts. Now, this was actually something that was true. So they actually had made this agreement. And then they go to this previous statement dealing with what he says on November 22nd regarding the border. So you can see the connection between these stories, November 22nd and November 25th. Now, my view is that his hand here is in some sense loosed, but this isn't really a direct, we wouldn't have predicted this type of thing in connection with this prophecy. We wouldn't have said, well, what we're going to see is Trump's hand loosed regarding the Mexican border. We wouldn't have thought of the restraint in that way. We couldn't have made this prediction. But we do see that there is, in a sense, a loosening that happens on the 25th of November. Now, the chronology of that is, the issue here. So I'm going to go here again. And we're going to try to address, even though I don't have a video of it, I just have my memory and Stephen's memory when we presented this to Jeff. So this is not what I want. I want this one. This. Okay. So everybody should be able to see this once I get it set up. Just hang on. Okay, so here is the dates here at the end. November 22nd, 2018, which I have the 12th day of the 8th month, and November 25th, 2018, which I have the 15th day of the 8th month. Now, this is the chart then that I prepared when I presented it on November 10th, 2019. So a year later, I'm going to present this to Jeff, and this is at the School of the Prophets, to Jeff and a few others, Stephen and Odilio included, as we were flown there for that weekend. Well, I was flown there for the weekend. They were there for quite a while doing presentations. Now, there was definitely a reaction to these news stories as having any fulfillment. And Stephen, what would you say was the reaction, especially by Clayton, regarding that? What was his reaction to how I was interpreting these events?
My memory's not the best. Can't really remember.
Okay, you don't remember?
It was, I think, Jeff, I think, was a wee bit more open.
Okay.
I think Bronwyn was probably a bit, she was there, wasn't she, as well?
Yeah. And she was definitely opposed to it.
That there comes across, but really, I can't really remember too much.
Okay. Well, Clayton was just upset about the conspiracy theory aspect of what he saw as liberal propaganda. So that he didn't think any of this was of any significance. It was just CNN and the media spinning stories about what Trump was doing, which I didn't quite understand his concern, because what Trump said on the Thanksgiving speech, I listened to the entire speech. So it really has nothing to do with what the media says about it. Now, as far as November 25th, well, we never really made a prediction about November 25th. Right, so we never said that his hand's going to be loosened or weak or restrict. What's the word? Restrained, and then loosened on any particular dates. We just had marked November 22nd. Now, you do remember that that Jeff was actually much more interested in the Thanksgiving ceremonies connected to November 22nd regarding to the restraining of turkey. That is, the turkey is restrained and loosed. Correct?
Yes, I remember that being a theme.
Yeah. So now this is something that, and, how much we want to go into it, I don't think I don't think it's an extremely important point. But Jeff accepted the structure. But for him, it wasn't about these events that we saw in the media. It was about the significance of Thanksgiving itself and the symbol of Thanksgiving of a turkey. So a turkey is called a turkey fowl because they come from Turkey. But also on Thanksgiving, or not exactly on that date, but just days before, the president is going to pardon the turkey. So this is a tradition that happens. So there's going to be this turkey has been restrained, and then it's going to be pardoned. And so Jeff just thought that that's what we should understand by this. So he didn't have problems with what had happened. But we know that this became a major issue. That is, first off, my position is that this is really fulfilled by the events internally and illustrated by external events. And as far as the turkey as being a symbol, I don't have a problem with that, but it doesn't fit in with the prediction either. So we have this issue of this prophecy or this prediction that's made, and different interpretations of it even after the fact. So this becomes a problem. Could we predict events? My view was we can put dates there, but our ability to predict events is rather weak. Now, I'm just going to try to get these, and I didn't have time to put all these emails into a document, but I kind of wish I had. I don't really like showing people my emails. Hopefully, people's emails addresses. I don't want those seen. Now, so I'm just going to quickly go through and try to find these.
You said turkeys are from Turkey?
Well, that's what they're named after. There's something to do with Turkey. That's why they're called turkeys. The name Turkey comes from the fact that they come from Turkey, whatever that means. I mean, I don't think they're just, or there's maybe some symbol or some similarity to the turkey fowl from Turkey or something like that. But the name comes from Turkey. That is the reason why they're called turkeys, has to do with Turkey, whatever that reason is.
Well, they're saying they're native to North America.
Yeah, so they're native to North America, but the name itself is because it's similar to a bird that comes from Turkey, something to that effect. That's my understanding from reading it online, in Wikipedia. But yeah, so they are native to North America, but they called them turkey fowl.
Yeah, one theory is that when Europeans first encountered turkeys in America, they incorrectly identified the birds as a type of guinea fowl,
Right.
which were already being imported into Europe by Turkey merchants.
Okay.
Via Constantinople.
Okay. Yeah. So that's kind of the story. But the point is, the name Turkey, the reason why they're called turkeys is because of Turkey, the country. That would be pretty much agreed upon, I think. Okay, so we're going to look at one of my emails. So this is an email with me and Larry Hine. And for some reason, I can't do this. Okay. So I'm responding to him. This is back in November 10th, 2020. So this is 2 years after the prediction, and we're discussing this. So I'm not doing this in order and kind of doing it backwards. I'm not setting any internal dates. You are misinformed. I've been very clear that we cannot set any dates for any events, period. Any future dates are only part of a symbolic structure, as I've already publicly stated. For instance, I should say, prior to July 18, 2020, Dan Vanderhorst had proposed August 13, 2022. We studied this out and came to the conclusion that this date was only part of a symbolic structure. We could not expect any event, whether internal or external. I'm very concerned about your misrepresentation of November 22, 2018. I made no prediction. The purpose, as clearly stated by me, was to see whether we could predict any events in advance. It was quite clear we could not. Also, Elder Jeff accepted the lines that led to that date. What we could not see is some event that all could agree on. This should have been seen as evidence that any date, internal or external, could not be predicted. And I should say any event on a particular date. I do not know if you have read my comments on your sermon, but it's clear everything you said was either untrue or misrepresentation of facts. So we're obviously here. This is just a little while before this. And he says, regarding November 22nd, I distinctively remember speaking to you and Heidi in your truck. So I guess we were in our truck. Mm-hmm. So we must have driven back from somewhere. Oh, well, I don't know.
We were going somewhere.
Maybe we were going somewhere. You said to me the event was fulfilled by the news articles that you brought to my attention. I went back and read those articles to try to better understand your point. You did not mention at that time anything about what you're saying now. Quote, the purpose was clearly stated by me, was to see whether we could predict any events in advance. Well, so maybe, his memory is selective, because we made this really clear in the study that we did on the 21st of why we were making this prediction. And we made it clear on the 19th as well. So he's taking and when I made that comment from the truck, I'm making that comment basically just, I wouldn't say flippantly is not quite the right word, but just very casually, just, maybe this is the prediction, but not, so it wasn't a careful conversation. It's something that I'm just sort of blurting out because we're leaving or whatever. And so I'm just saying this to him while we're in the truck. So it's not like we sat down and went over this. So he interpreted that as I really believed that event was fulfilled and that I had made this prediction, right? But I didn't think that that's what it was. All I was saying is that we had a restraint and we had predicted a restraint, but we didn't really predict an event. And so this is a misunderstanding, which in some way is initiated by me in the way that I communicated these things. So yeah, I guess I'm reading these articles, but you guys can't see them, which probably is the best way to do that, because you would see email addresses and phone numbers and things like that. So I'm going to go through these other emails. Now, one of the things, all I did in my email is I just searched this. Now, there's some emails that I did with Brother Dwight when he first asked about this when he was in Arkansas and this November 22nd prediction was brought up.
And on that situation,
Yeah.
I have no problem with you showing any communication that you and I have had on that.
Yeah, well, I just don't want to show Larry Hines' email
Right.
and that.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to find this here.
Yeah, while you're looking to
Yeah.
find that, turkeys are known as such in the English language because turkeys and their close relatives, the guinea fowl,
Yeah.
were initially brought into Europe by Turkish merchants.
Mhm,
Turkeys are indigenous to North America.
mhm.
At this point, you will find turkeys in every American state except for one, which is strange because it's Alaska. Because you'll find turkeys throughout North America and Central America.
Okay,
You will find them in Canada, you'll find them in North America. They were first domesticated in Central America about 800 BC for their meat. And indigenous North Americans began using turkey feathers in robes and blankets around 200 BC.
okay.
So they're just, I mean, being taken to Europe and called turkeys because a merchant was selling them, that's a strange reason to have that kind of a name.
Yeah, but we do have this name Turkey, and it's connected to Turkey,
Yeah,
right? And
Agreed.
Jeff, this is what Jeff picks up on when he looks at it, is he's looking at this restraint and the loosening of the turkey in connection with Thanksgiving. And that's what he sees as the fulfillment. To him, that's more significant. So he would be taking November 22nd, just connecting this idea that Islam is going to be connected with Trump's presidency. At least that's the way that I took it. But I wrote an email to Jeff back in October of 2019. So prior to me going to Arkansas, where he brings up this idea about the predictions dealing with Nashville and so forth. So this is where we're just starting to look at this whole issue of July 18th. And I just bring up there in one sentence when I'm talking about making these predictions. So this is before, we get this July 18th prediction as part of our movement that Jeff actually endorses it. It says, when I made the November 22nd, 2018 prediction, I could understand the symbols, restraint and loosening, but I was unable to know what events they would apply to. I had to wait until they occurred before I knew. Also, these were symbolic. In their application, even north and south were applied in a way I did not expect. So my point was, I could, after looking at this prophecy, I could connect it in some way, but I wasn't able to predict an event. And this was my concern dealing with July 18th. At that time, we have the date July 18th, and Jeff is picking up on that date. But as far as what's going to happen, is it going to, we don't have that prediction regarding Nashville yet, back in October 2nd of 2019. That's going to be coming. And Odilio is just presenting this idea that's going to be Nashville. Jeff is just hearing of that. So there's this whole opening up of things. Now, I do say here to Jeff, so this is, okay, so in September 20th, I wrote Jeff an email where I go back and I talk about the November 22nd prediction. So this is September of 2019. And I did a study on which is on YouTube, on my YouTube page, about the November 22nd prediction. And my prediction regarding, I believe that my prediction regarding Trump's hand being restrained and loosened was fulfilled. So that's the position I took back then. It says, our position at the time was that the prediction was given us so that we could understand how the symbols are interpreted. That is, we needed practice making predictions. It is an interesting fact that Trump's hand was loosened on November 25th, which is the 15th day of the 8th month on the biblical calendar. And I give him this chart, which we later are going to use. So there was a whole bunch of discussion on other issues in that email. Now, the one that I initially sent Jeff is, now the title of the email. So this was not wise on my part. So this is November 19th of 2018. I'm going to show you this. So nothing here's, you see some names, but you don't see any other information. Whoops. There we go. Okay, so what we have here is this title, which, was me definitely overstating things. But the intent was not to say that I was predicting a bomb to drop. Literally, that's why I put it in quotation marks. Prediction for a bomb to drop on the battle between the King of the North and the King of South on November 22nd, 2018. So this is before we even really make a prediction, other than that we have November 22nd, 2018. And so I put this there. And then I write this to the elders. I'm soliciting your assistance on this matter. Though I have not completed the study, the suggestion is that there will be an event on November 22nd, November 9th, Julian, 2018. This event would be part of the information warfare. So here I'm not even looking for some kind of battle or anything like that. What is intriguing is the events and what they suggest as to what information warfare entails. I woke this morning with a solution to a study that Heidi and I have been engaged in for the last few days. I've been studying the American Civil War and have found a connection between the events in 977 BC with the North and South in Israel and with the battle between the North and South in our time. Part of the key was a realization that the 235 years from 977 BC to 742 BC are related to the 19 years from 742 to 723 BC. It is well known that the Metonic cycle is a period of 235 months. That is, in the Metonic cycle, there are 19 years with 12 months, etc. This means that the 235 years from November 22nd, 977 BC to the to 742 BC and the 235 months from 740 BC to 723 BC are connecting these events. In studying the Civil War, we found that there was a connection between the war and the present practice of American Thanksgiving. The simplified suggestion is that the withering and restoration of Jeroboam's hand in 1 Kings 13:1-5 is a symbol that relates to the events that will occur on this Thanksgiving. For one, Jeroboam was officiating in the temple on the day he created as a counterfeit day of atonement. This date being November 22 would directly relate to November 22 of this year. The Civil War in 742 BC also relates to our history, as we know. There are 235 months from the start of that war to the end of northern Israel. The connection between the rise of the USA and the rise of northern Israel cannot be ignored, etc. So, and I also deal with the Stamp Act and all these different types of things, and there was that basic chart that I showed you. Now, in this context then, how are people depicting what I'm doing as far as making a prediction? Does it look like I have a definite prediction and that after November 22nd, that I know what the prediction was and that it was fulfilled to the very letter?
No, it does not.
No. So that's not what was happening. Now, and to me, what I wanted was help. Here we have a date. And to me, this was providential that we're finding this date just prior to it coming about. And this was Heidi studying on the Civil War. And us looking at the Civil War and seeing these connections. So we're not, it's not an intentional thing on our part to try to make a prediction. We just end up with this date in looking at this structure. And then we need help on that, right? So can people help us with this? What we were unaware of is the animosity that was occurring behind the scenes. If we had known of this, we would have acted quite differently, because so far, for the most part, everything had moved really smoothly. I mean, we were involved in affirming November 9th. The July 18th prediction was initially accepted by Jeff. Now, I knew that there was something going on because of how we were being treated by people. But, I just assumed that this was something else. And so I didn't expect this reaction. And basically what I would call just a closed way of dealing with this. Why was it so closed? If this is something that our movement wants to look at, let's look at it in an open way. So nothing that I was doing was secretive. And I definitely wasn't trying to get any followers or things like this. Now, part of what happens, and I'm not going to show you the email because it names a person that I really don't want her name and what Jeff says about her, because I don't think it was correct. But there was this suggestion that where the house we ended up having this study at was that there was a whole bunch of stuff going on behind the scenes. This person was really evil, was satanic. And I think Jeff is wrong in his assessment of what happened. Because it's not his own personal interactions, it's other people's reports. And this is something that I think Jeff made a mistake on, especially near the end, in that things were so confusing. It was so difficult for him. He was worn out. He was exhausted. And he doesn't know who to trust. I mean, he's just been bored, he's got all these things going on. He's ready to retire. He's thinking of giving the movement over to Parminder. You have all of these voices clamoring for his attention. And Jeff just doesn't have the energy to address these problems. And then when he writes that letter about this person whose study we had, it was at their house that we had this study on November 21st, where Larry Hine attended. The things that he says about her, Parminder had already betrayed him at this point. He's just not able to evaluate all these reports and stories about different people. And so I think he was wrong. And I think the reason for many of these people siding with Parminder was different, because I know for one thing, this person had no connection with Parminder. But Jeff believed that she had a connection with Parminder all through this history, and it just wasn't true. And this is part of the problem with rumors and stories, is they can really distort, be a distortion of reality, and that we have to be very careful about what we hear about people. And so, but anyway, the point is when we had the meeting there was already this animosity towards this person that we didn't know about. So having the meeting there was seen as us forming some kind of new group or something to that effect. And they expressed this idea that we were just like these other groups, that had split off. We go there, we want a platform. and
kind of
we're
agenda.
we're secretly working behind the scenes to gain followers and all this kind of stuff. And of course, that there's nothing further from the truth. But when people have something in their mind about you, you know, everything's going to be interpreted in a certain way. So the suspicion was already there. And so us making this prediction about November 22nd, even though we're being as open as the day, they don't see it that way, you know, and so we're very surprised by the reaction. But, you know, we do end up, you know, eventually being asked to leave the School of the Prophets in sort of a roundabout way. They don't want to tell us to leave. They just make it so that there's no way that we can stay. And so we have to leave. And, but then that is somewhat healed after September 7th, 2019. And then it's obviously with the July 18, 2020 prediction being accepted by Jeff. So in going through this history, is there things that I need to address, Dwight or Stephen, who know a bit more about these things?
I don't think that there's that much more. I know that my experience when I was in Arkansas, when this got brought up, and quite honestly, it was brought up by Larry Hine.
Yeah.
It was brought up very directly, and he was very animated against even addressing this. And my thought process at that time, if it's so bad, why hasn't it been examined? Why even bring it up?
Yeah.
Now, the issue was brought up again and again, but primarily always by Larry. And I never understood why. And you're right, you and I had we had a brief email conversation about it. I asked a couple of basic questions. There really wasn't that much. And I don't recall that that we ever got into the conversation about this. So I've waited for a couple of years to hear about this, mostly because when something is brought up in the way that Larry brought it up,
Mhm.
and then is not addressed, and it becomes a big open secret, it always bothers me.
Yeah, and this is the thing is we tried to address this in 2019. So now, to me, I mean, it wasn't really an issue. I didn't understand why, once we have this July 18th prediction and we're there in Arkansas, their main concern is this November 22nd prediction. So we're going to spend, you know, a whole day in 3 studies studying the November 22nd prediction. So I didn't really understand that. I didn't understand the purpose of that. But that I did what I was asked to do, to present it and what I thought about it. And then Jeff had his take on it. But there wasn't really an interest in studying July 18th, even though that was what this movement was doing. So I just found that sort of odd. And you know, at that time, I did presentations on Sabbath. I was originally just scheduled to do one presentation. I did a presentation on the 273, basically dealing with it as a symbol connected with Numbers chapter 3 and Acts 27, and some of the stuff dealing with the line of 273. But even then, there was a resistance to almost anything I was doing by many of the people at FFA. Not Jeff, but other people there. They just didn't want to hear from me. And so all through that history, I'm not doing any presentations, any Sabbath schools or sermons or anything through Zoom leading up to July 18th. So they're not asking me to do anything. And of course, that's their prerogative. I'm just saying that really didn't make much sense to me, considering my connection with the July 18 prediction and all the information that I had regarding how we made that prediction. And I could see that there wasn't a really deep understanding of July 18th and also the sort of carefulness that we needed about making the prediction. So I never really got to express that view in that forum. Now, of course, I was doing lots of other videos and so forth. So, people could watch those. It's not like I was shut down completely. But as far as the many people in the movement who weren't watching my videos, they weren't getting from FFA presentations by me to sort of clarify some of these points. And the November 22nd projection, they addressed it in 2019 in a secret study that's videotaped and never released, but it becomes a hot issue in connection with the December 6th declaration and arguments that they have against me. But it's not ever addressed in an open way. And that's sort of unfair. I think that's what you're talking about. This sort of open secret.
Well, there's that, but Larry was quite direct in addressing the November 22nd prophecy. And he addressed it with me on a ride back from the airport to the property, to FFA.
Okay.
But he refused to give any kind of details.
Right, so he didn't want to talk about it. It was just this issue of something that I had taught that was error, but he didn't want to talk about what it was.
Right, but see, the problem that I have with something like that, why even bring it up?
Mm-hmm.
And if he's wanting to say Theodore's in error in his studies,
Mm-hmm.
then even that is going too far, because he didn't want to give any kind of an example. Now, keep in mind, this first time was when, as a group, we were in the middle of the study on Ezekiel.
Mm-hmm.
And as you recall, there were several of those studies that I would join in where either I was in Arkansas or I was in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would go back over some of those studies later and catch up. But my comment, I was very direct with Larry about this. He just flat looked at me and he said, Theodore is in error in his studies. And I asked him directly, I said, to what studies are you referring? Well, any of his studies. I said, now hold it. I've been participating in the study on Ezekiel. Have you watched it? No, because those are in error. I said, now wait, hold on here. You're telling me that the study is in error because Theodore is involved. Yet I have conducted several of the studies. Have you watched any of those? No. Then how can you say that my studies are in error? And to that, he would not respond.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever I'm presented with ill logic, and in this case, guilt by association,
Mm-hmm.
I tend to watch more carefully. I tend to be more cautious in that which I choose to say.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that went on during my time in Arkansas at that point that bothered me because they just did not make sense. And a lot of it goes right back to this. There was a great benefit to me by the study in Ezekiel. There's still quite a few points that I have to work through on my own, but the understanding of Ezekiel's second vision from chapter 8 through chapter 19 has been something I've found to be rock solid.
Mhm.
And that was part of the studies that we had done that I had presented. And that it bothered me that Larry was being so animated to say that these were in error.
Mhm. Yeah, and
So,
yeah, and the whole point of this, of course, you know, for me, how do we know what is true? And the only way that we can do that is to compare scripture with scripture, to study things out. Do we make mistakes? Yes. Did I make mistakes? Absolutely. But I was very open about the fact that I could make mistakes, and that we needed to be in this together as a movement. That we needed to look at things openly and honestly as a movement to know whether we are correct in our understanding of things. And so this to me has always been the issue. The issue is, how can we know what is true? And God has been giving us all kinds of evidence to show that our prediction was correct, that that 777 days is something given by God. It has all kinds of prophetic connections. And this is a time in which God has given us to study this and to draw our conclusions. And we have, that time keeps passing on. You know, we're going to come to December 25th, 2021. And I believe that we have to come to some kind of conclusion in our own minds, in our own individual study of what we are going to do, what our message is, and what action we're going to take individually. And I don't think that we can just continue going on and on in these types of studies, you know, with all these winds of doctrine floating about and all these different understandings of what happened. You know, one of the things when we look at the charts, right? We have the 1843 and the 1850 chart, and we have as a symbol the number of years between those charts, even though it's not quite correct because of when the chart's made. But we understand it to be a symbol of 7 years. Correct?
agreed.
Yes,
And what's being
Yes.
accomplished in that 7-year period? Could we put a parallel for our movement with the 777 days? Is that a fair parallel?
Well, in that 7-year period from, you know, in the time in which the charts were being addressed, you have quite a bit of growth in
Mhm.
understanding of Bible truth.
Mhm.
So if we're going to have a parallel, would that not be part of the parallel for our time?
Yeah. And then when we get to the 1850 chart, we now have these truths placed on the chart.
Correct.
And I think that that's what we have to, and I'm not saying that we're going to have a chart, but we have to have the truths that come out of our movement, just as the truths that came out of the Millerite movement. They need to be solidified in some way, that we know we know where we stand. I'm not saying that we have a creed or a test of faith or something like that, but that we can see from an individual point of view where we stand, what things we believe, and that those that believe those things are going to be united under those beliefs. And we can see in our study of early writings, page 74, which I believe was so providential in its timing and in the things that we discovered, that shows the parallel of the movement at that time and our movement at this time. So we're in that same period. We have fanaticism. We have, you know, the methods that we need to use, what we need to do to accomplish the work is being given to us, and that work will be accomplished. But also Ellen White is taking the truths on the 1843 chart, laying them out in that October 23rd vision, and also the new truths that had been discovered, and basically say, this is what's going to be on the chart. And I believe we are doing that right now. That we're taking these, what we have studied, and we're saying, here is our message. Here is, the foundation was laid correctly. We're going to accept it. And we have this new understanding of things, and this is what we're going to stand by. That's the way that I see it. Whether other people see it that way or not, I don't know. Now, we, in notebook chapter or notebook, dealing with notebook 1, it is, dealing with time setting. That was really the last thing we went through before we got into this study on November 22nd. And are we finished with this November 22nd study? Or is there something that we need to address?
Probably quite a bit that I would like to look into as far as the charts that you would put together, just so I can be a little more settled on
Okay.
exactly what you had going on.
Okay. So, because people need to ask questions to know what things I need to clarify. Now, one thing I can point out is in regard to the calendars and the dates that I have here. Yeah, so I think we'll do another study tomorrow. Well, the other thing, Dwight, is you sent me a document,
Right.
and it relates to some of the things that we've discussed in connection with this.
Right.
And that has
We
to
were
do with
talking
the
about Thursday.
Marines. Yeah, so it has to do with the Marines and the history dealing with Islam. Now, I think this is important. So as far as the November 22nd date itself is concerned, I'm just going to wrap up one little bit with it. But I think the implications in our time still need to be examined. And the way that we're going to examine them, I think, is to go back to 1798 and that history dealing with Islam. Does that sound reasonable to you, Dwight?
Well, Theodore, the studies have been progressing well.
Okay.
And all of this has been reasonable and it's logical.
Okay. And you can see, though, how what we need to do now in our next step is not look at November 22nd itself, but look at how we look at Islam in the past in Millerite history. What you're talking about there in the short study that you sent me, dealing with the Marines and their history, I think is very profound, and does relate to our predictions. So I think part of the problem with the November 22nd prediction is at the time we make it, we don't really understand our message. That is, we don't really understand what it is we're doing with time, why God gave us time, because we think that we're supposed to be making predictions. But I think that what God is trying to show us is something else. And that is that time is a seal, but it's not something that we can predict. And that was the mistake. And I believe God was showing that us through time and through these periods. But if we go back and look at this history in 1798, and we look at Islam, and when we take everything that we have done, we can now evaluate it in a different way. That when we see these structures and these dates, these are witnesses, but they're not meant to give us a structure to predict a certain event on a certain date. And that's what I get from the November 22nd study. Now,
Right.
I have up here, I just want to show you something. Now, some people, again, this is always really, really difficult for people. But there is 3 different ways that we can determine the month. Anybody know what those ways are? And that most of the time they align with each other. So what's the way that we normally think that we can look at the beginning of the month? any given month on the biblical calendar? What would we do?
When we're looking for the first visible crescent.
Okay, so we look for the first visible crescent. Now, and maybe there's 4 different ways. Now, so we can look for the first visible crescent, and definitely we would do that at the beginning of the Jewish year, whether we're using the in ancient times, that's what they would do for the most part. Now, the rabbinic calendar doesn't do that. It does it by calculation. That is, they have a set pattern of 19 years and they just follow that set pattern. And they're sometimes off by 2 days when it comes to the start of any particular month. So, and there's nothing wrong with the rabbinic calendar in that sense. It works for the rabbis, but it doesn't work for historical events. That is, you can't look at events in the past and use the rabbinic calendar. I know people who try to do that. So they try to do that for the crucifixion of Christ. And they say, oh, he was crucified on a Wednesday in 30 AD because, and even then they're not, they're using the rabbinic calendar, but they're having the Passover start or the beginning of the month start before even the astronomical new moon, which is crazy. And they wouldn't have done that in the time of Christ. So you can't take a calendar from 800 years later and apply it to the time of Christ. But we look at the first visible crescent. Now, Grace Amadon, an Adventist scholar, and her dad was friends of Ellen White. So they were there in the 1850s. Grace Amadon did some studies that were published in theological journals regarding how to determine the date for the crucifixion of Christ. And so I have here, this is not easy to see for everyone, but you can see the phases of the moon. And if we go back to 31 AD, for some reason, I always type in 38. I don't know how I do that. We go back to 31 AD. This is the month, this is the date Jesus was crucified, 27th of April. Now, notice where the full moon is. And so this full moon here is what we call the astronomical full moon. It's on the 25th of April in 31 AD. Now, the Jews determined the full moon in a different way than we do. That is, they didn't have an astronomical full moon. They can't see a full moon at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They're not calculating it in that way. They're going to do it by observation. Now, this is from Boston, so I need to change this to Jerusalem. So there we go. So now we're in Jerusalem. Now, here you're going to see it's still on the 25th, but it's going to be at 11:23 p.m. And that the time on this Skyview Cafe, these are what we call local times. That is, they're not daylight time. They're not time zone times. They're based upon the zenith. So midnight is actually midnight. So this would have been, an hour and 47 minutes before midnight that you're going to have the astronomical full moon. But it's not going to be observed as a full moon now by the Jews on that date. And the suggestion is, based on ancient writings, is that the month is not just determined by the new moon, but it's also determined by the full moon. That is, the 14th of the month cannot occur prior to the full moon. And so in 31 AD, one of the arguments that Grace Amadon makes is that the full moon, the day of the full moon, is from a biblical perspective, the 27th of April. So even though you see it here an hour and 45 minutes before midnight commencing the 26th, the Jews would not have recognized the full moon until the 27th. So that means they would have then had the Passover on the 27th, on the day of the full moon. And that would mean that you're not going to start the month earlier than that. Now, we know that they do that not just for the Passover month, but for every month that they observe the moon. So Once they start the year in April, so the beginning of the year, the first day of the first month is going to be April 14th, even though the astronomical new moon is on the 10th. And you could see the visible crescent on the 12th, which would make the 13th the first day of the first month. But because of the full moon, you actually can't have the first day of the first month till the 14th. So I know this becomes very, very technical. Now I'm going to illustrate this using stellarium. And I know I'm going to go a little bit over time today because it's already 9 o'clock. So I'm going to try to do this quickly. So this program here, I'm going to share the screen on this. Once I get this going, so just hang on a second. I don't know how to do this. There we go. Okay. So this is stellarium, and this program is basically an astronomy program. It's quite useful, and I can get rid of the land. I can get rid of the atmosphere and the land, and I can also draw the horizon here. You're going to see the horizon is right in the middle, and this date, I'm going to change the date to the year 31 AD. And I don't know why I can't do that. Oh, here it is. So I'm going to go to 31 AD, and I can't make this any bigger. Let me go to the 4th month, and I'm going to go to the 25th. Now, what you're going to see here is the sun and the moon and their relationship to each other on these dates. And what matters is when the sun rises and the moon sets. So did I do this right? 31 April. I don't see the moon. Okay, that's odd. Oh,
Where's the moon at? I don't see the moon.
there's the moon there. So yeah, so I need to be looking south. That was the problem.
Okay, I got it.
So now you see the sun and the moon?
Yeah, yeah, I see it now, yeah.
Okay, so what's going to happen is in order for the new moon to be observed, you have to have the sun set before the moon rises. Okay, so I'm going to try to do this here. Now you're going to see, whoops, I'm going to go back. Okay, so what you see is the sun is about to set, and whoops, going the wrong direction. So the sun is about to set, and you see that center line, and maybe some of you can't see it. But the sun is going to set, and if the sun is not set, and see the moon is now in the sky, and the sun hasn't set. Now the sun has set. So what that means is that it's not a full moon. Now the next day, we will clearly see, so I'm just going to speed this up a bit. Sun's going to come around again. And on this day, you're going to see that the sun is going to set. And after the sun sets, you see the sun sets here, then the moon rises. So that's at sunset on the 26th. That would mean that the 27th is the Passover. Now, when we go to the date in 2018 for that month, because they observe the month after the 7th month, you're going to observe each of these months. We're going to go to, well, that's October. I'm going to go to November. We're going to go to November, and the date is going to be the 20, oops, go this way. Date is going to be, we'll go back to the 24th, and we'll go to the 23rd. So I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit closer here. We can see the moon's way up there, sun's way down there. So I know some people aren't all that interested in this stuff, but when I go around here, so we're going to have moon set. What date is this? This is the 24th. So I'm going to keep going. Oops. Oh, I accidentally went to our date. I have to go back and stop this. Just hang on. Accidentally clicked the wrong button here. So let's go back to 2018. And the 11th month, 24th day. And so this is the reason I chose the 15th to be the date it was. So the 14th would have to be on the 24th. So I need to actually go back another day. Okay. And to show you which day ends up being the 14th day. I think I actually even have to go back another day. So let's go back. So this is going to be sunset on the 22nd of November. And the moon is going to be over here on the left. You're going to see the sun. Here, I'm going to move it like this. You're going to see the sun is going to set. And I'm going to zoom in a bit. There we go. So the sun's going to set. You can see on this date, the sun's going to set and the moon's going to rise. And you're going to see the moon's going to rise before the sun sets. So here we have the moon rising. The moon has risen. The sun is still not set. Now the sun sets. So the moon is above the horizon line. And so this date would then be following that. The 13th would end up being the 23rd of the month. So the 12th would be the 22nd. Now, as I go through, I'm going to come around again. So you can see now the moon is going to rise after the sun sets. So that means, and it says at the bottom that this is the 23rd. So this is the sunset beginning the 14th of the month. So the date that's going to be the 14th is the 24th, which means that the 25th would be the 15th day of the 8th month. This is the way that I calculated the months and that I do it. Now, most of the time you will find that you don't need to do this. The first visible crescent works sufficiently. So if you look at the first visible crescent, the vast majority of the time, it's going to align with the full moon, being the 14th day of the month. But on occasion, it's not going to work, and that is one of the months. So hopefully that's clear to people. That's why I chose the 15th to be the 25th. Now, so what we're going to do tomorrow then, and Dwight, you're going to be here tomorrow?
I plan on it.
Okay, because I do want to look at that history. Now, I'm studying it a little bit. I'm going to spend quite a bit more time today studying because I don't work today. So I'm going to spend quite a bit more time looking into this history, dealing with the Marines and these different battles with Islam. And this first battle with Islam, where America goes on foreign soil.
Right.
And so it's going to be with Islam. And so this becomes really, really interesting, especially in the chronology of events. So there's a whole bunch of things connected with that. Now, the other thing is, Daniel Vanderhorst has a new video that he put out yesterday. I recommend people watch it. I haven't watched the whole thing, so I can't say I agree with everything, but I agreed with everything that I'd seen so far, up to about 2/3 of the video. But I think it's important to understand what he's finding and these connections with our time. And I might look at some of those things, because we're dealing with time setting right now, and look at some of those things later in the week. But we're going to see that there's these connections that are extremely important in the past with the present, and we can't ignore them. So when it comes to the history of Islam and the United States, I think that we need to look at that. And we need to look at then, how are we interpreting that in the present time? What role does Islam have in connection with this movement? And we still don't really know the answer to that question fully. So thanks to everybody for your patience. We're going to close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we are so thankful, Lord, for the time that we have to study. And we just pray for your continued presence throughout this week. We pray that you can bless those that are mourning, and the loss that we have of a dear brother. In this message, we just pray, Lord, that you can bless his family. Be with each one of us in our personal lives and the sorrowing that we experience. And help us to strengthen one another. May your Holy Spirit work upon our hearts in transforming our characters. And be with us as we come together again tomorrow, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.